Caspar, just staying on one of the key elements of this, of course, which are the elements themselves. We've seen through the dramatic increase in the price of nickel and the dependency on certain countries that there are very considerable risks here. What would your advice to be to countries like India or anywhere, frankly, in the world in terms of developing the upstream supply of those minerals and exploiting them and balancing out the whole economics of this? Because it's not free to get into that, of course.
Sorry, you did break up a little bit there. I heard that it was about the minerals and the availability and dependence on them, but I didn't catch the last bit of the question.
Well, very specifically, as an example, and I'm an English literature graduate, not a chemist, so treat me like a child. But if India wanted to develop its cobalt or its nickel industry, should it? Could it? What's involved?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a huge amount of interest across the globe from many different governments in developing their own, what we've termed at Benchmark, their own lithium-ion economy. Now, some of that may include developing resources. One thing about those resources or mines is you can only develop them if they're there. You can't pick the location of geological deposits. They're just where they are. So if those resources exist, there needs to be some exploration, which one of the challenges is that is usually very costly and permitting is very time consuming. But the other consideration is, are those resources economic? So fundamentally, at the moment where you have lithium prices at record highs, nickel prices at, well, we'll find out when the LME contract resumes tomorrow, but somewhere near record highs, if not exceeding them. Cobalt prices are very high. Obviously, many deposits become economic, but fundamentally, whether it's 5 years' time or 10 years' time, those prices are going to go back down. So is it worthwhile for a country to develop its resources? Well, where are they on the cost curve is the question that you need to ask. Now, there's two things to keep in mind. Is ideally you want to be at the bottom of that cost curve, which means that your resources are the cheapest to produce on a global basis. But even if you're not, the other thing to bear in mind is that looking at these markets, which are going to experience growth rates of somewhere between 15 and 25% CAGR to the end of the decade, that actually when you add that much additional supply to a resource base, the cost curve increases, because what typically happens with mining and mineral extraction is that the very first deposits that are mined and excavated are the best, i.e. the best resource and the cheapest to produce. And then as you add additional, you go for the slightly less favourable ones, i.e. not quite as good and therefore more expensive. So there will be a change to the cost curve. That has definitely already happened across lithium. And that will likely happen across the other minerals as well, as we need to add, as I say, somewhere between 15 and 25% growth rates annualized over the next 10 years for all of these markets. But, I guess the really fundamental thing is security of supply. So actually getting access to these minerals. You don't have to do that by developing a domestic mine. You can set up agreements with other regions. You can attract commercial enterprises to your country that will secure those minerals not on your behalf, but as a commercial enterprise will secure those minerals, and then theoretically you get access via proxy. So there are kind of many ways to deal with it. Perhaps for some regions, yes, developing domestic mines and resources works, but I think as a very, very minimum, you need to ensure that you have the midstream supply, so chemical processing and refining, cell production, EV or vehicle production, and then finally, of course, a really important part is the recycling, because if you don't have those minerals domestically and you're importing them, why would you then let them leave your region and go back to somewhere else to be recycled and used elsewhere? If you've gone through that kind of import process, you should keep them at least kind of in the domestic region or nearby.